Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. I'm Mark Crothers. It's that time of the week where we get a view from the opposition, looking ahead to what feels like a massive game for Newcastle United as they host Brentford at St James's Park on Saturday evening. I am joined by Bees fan Craig Tillyer from the Ealing Road podcast. Welcome along, Craig.
Thank you for having me. Very happy to be talking about this one.
Yeah, plenty to talk about. Just first, before we get going, a word from our sponsors. A big thank you to NordVPN. Hit the link in the podcast description box to get a discounted offer on your NordVPN plan. One subscription can be used across 10 devices, and there's no risk with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Craig, first of all, we'll get straight into it, I think, with Brentford. I would argue with the transfer activity during the summer, and we will come on to that in a moment, the fact that big players were coaxed away, the fact that Thomas Frank was coaxed away after doing such a fine job, putting Keith Andrews in charge, which was a little bit of a surprise, I think, for outsiders. Were there fears ahead of the season that this could go very, very wrong for Brentford?
I don't think it was a surprise specifically for outsiders. I think a lot of Brentford fans were surprised, especially with some of the names that were linked to the job. I'm well aware of the fact that even Pochettino interviewed to come across back to the Premier League as well. So it caught all of us off guard. But he's done a fantastic job so far. And like you say, we've lost some players, some of which we don't really like talking about, but I'm sure we will today, including, Christian Norgard going to Arsenal, Bryan Mbeumo going to Manchester United, Thomas Frank obviously going to Spurs. Unfortunately, it hasn't worked out so fantastically for him at the moment. And then the controversial one with Wissa heading off to yourselves. I think that it was going to be a big season ahead for us.
Yeah, and I mean, it'd be safe to say it's surpassed all expectations to be going into, coming to St James's in the first week of February, sitting in the top 7 and top 8 comfortably within, touching distance of Europe. I mean, it must be such a surprise to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, especially after the first 45 minutes of this season, we was 3-0 down away to Nottingham Forest. And all you have to do is look at where they are now at the start of the season. So it was a bit crazy. And I remember being stood in the concourse at half time thinking, goodness me, this is going to be a long season. And then fast forward 23 games later, as you say, we're sat 7th. We're 3 points behind Liverpool, 4 points behind Chelsea. I don't think that anybody, Brentford fans included, could have predicted that this was where we would be come February, that's for sure.
Has there been an evolution from Frank, or is it kind of more of the same?
There's definitely a different style of play. Thomas Frank, originally, when we first got promoted to the Premier League, Thomas Frank was very safe. If we was going to somewhere like St James's Park, be it St James's Park, Old Trafford, the Emirates, you knew you was going to get a back five. Hope to catch these teams on the counter with Ivan Toney, Bryan Mbeumo up top, and Yoane Wissa. But there has been a slight change this year. Keith Andrews is finding his feet. Let's not forget this is his first managerial role. He's finding his feet in the Premier League, and there are certain aspects to his game that I still think that he needs to refine, especially when we're finding ourselves behind in games. That's when we're in trouble. But the football, as a majority, is really good. There have been games this season where you definitely question that experience or lack of experience, should I say.
Yeah. Is it naivety, do you think, or is it just that, becoming accustomed to maybe being the lead role in the dugout in the Premier League?
Potentially. I mean, I think back to games like Leeds at home where we draw 1-1 and we really struggle to break them down. Yeah. And then I think back to, it's crazy to think as well, is Manchester City at home. We lost that game 1-0. We've only lost twice at home all season. Our away record, not so fantastic. But when we played Man City, we went 1-0 down. And rather than bringing on those attacking players to potentially go and get something out of it, you can see that it's almost he's comfortable with a 1-0 defeat. That's what it felt like from a fan's perspective as well, when he's bringing on defenders to see out a defeat rather than taking that risk and potentially going for a point or even all three.
Yeah. We look throughout the side. I mean, there's one name sort of stands out in terms of performances this season, which is Igor Thiago, who has stepped in that number 9 role brilliantly. I mean, just how good do you think he is, and how good could he be?
Well, if he keeps going the way he's going at the moment, there's a pretty big tournament in the summer coming up, and it would be difficult for Ancelotti to look past him for sure. And we've had this conversation as well. Is when you think about the great Brazilian strikers, you have to go way back to like Ronaldo to think of the next brilliant striker that they've had. They're all great wingers:
Yeah.
Neymar, Ronaldinho, Vinicius, all fantastic wingers, but not very many good strikers. Um, this is obviously his second season at Brentford. Last year, unfortunately, well, I say last year, first season, unfortunately, he got injured away at AFC Wimbledon in a pre-season friendly, and then made maybe 6 appearances, pushing the end of that season. But when you lose 50 goals, 40 goals in Wissa and Bruno, someone has to step up. And he's 16 goals in the Premier League, 17 in all competitions this season so far. And we was thinking, it'd be really good if he gets 10 goals this season. He's going to hit 20 for sure.
Yeah. I'm pleased you mentioned Christian Nørgaard, because I always thought he was maybe not for Brentford fans, but externally sort of one of the most underrated midfielders in the Premier League. Just really classy, really clever midfielder. How have they gone about replacing him?
Well, I think that a Newcastle fan favourite in Jordan Henderson has stepped in for us. Obviously, 35 years old, he's not one of those players that's going to boss the game for 90 minutes. But for a club like Brentford, he's a very astute signing, I think, to bring him in with the wealth of experience that he has. For players like Yoane Wissa, who is only 21 years old, and he gets to play alongside someone like Jordan Henderson, is only going to be good for him. And it shows the tweaks in his game that he's made this season has been brilliant. And players like Vitaly Janelt and Matthias Jensen, who were players that were with us in the Championship 6 seasons ago now and are still regulars in our midfield. It just goes to show that while we've had an evolution of a football club, we've been able to bring these players forwards with us.
I think one of the things I love about Brentford is the fact that, to me, it feels as if you're constantly proving people wrong. So, when you lose players in the summer and you bring in, with all due respect to Jordan Henderson, who is a brilliant, has been a brilliant player for a long time now, there was a lot of scoffing at that signature in that signing. But again, seems to have proved people wrong.
Yeah, I have to admit, I was one of those scoffers as well. When his name was floating around to begin with, I was like, no, that's not the answer. Yeah. I don't know what the question is, but that's not the answer. And it turns out that I was wrong, because he has been absolutely fantastic for us. And it's very similar to when we signed Christian Eriksen after that incident and he came back to the Premier League. Someone that has experience at the top level, that just raises the level of everybody around them.
Other end of the pitch, I have to ask about Caoimhin Kelleher, someone I thought Newcastle should have actually tried to make a bid for before he went to Brentford. And there's a lot of discussion about Newcastle's number 1 at the moment, and if they do need another goalkeeper in the summer. Just how good has Kelleher been? Because he was, I think it was it Jurgen Klopp said he was the best number 2 goalkeeper in the Premier League. But it's a big step up being a cover to someone like Alisson to being the regular number 1. How's he fared?
Well, I think he's been absolutely fantastic. There are things in every player's game, be it Thiago at the other end of the pitch or Kelleher in goal, that you'd like to refine. I'd love to say that Kelleher is fantastic in every area of the pitch, in every area of his game, sorry. But as a shot stopper, he's brilliant. I love the composure that he has when he's got the ball at his feet. The only thing that I wish he did more was just command that box a little bit more and be confident enough to come and catch it rather than resorting to punching it every single time. Yeah. But if he gets the ball as far away from the goal as possible, then I'm sure he's comfortable doing that.
Right, I think we've put it off long enough. I've tried to put it off as long as possible. We will talk about Yoane Wissa. Both clubs kind of found themselves in similar situations last summer, with obviously the Isak situation at Newcastle, who we don't like to talk about a lot either. They both kind of took similar routes to trying to force a move. I mean, as someone who follows Newcastle and reports on Newcastle, it was kind of heartbreaking to see a player that had been so brilliant for the club doing that. I'm guessing same emotions when it comes to Wissa.
Yeah. And it's the fickleness of football fans that I do really love, because Newcastle, not that you yourself may have done it, but there will be Newcastle fans out there that slandered Isak for what he did and gave him an unknown amount of grief. And then to see Wissa doing it at Brentford and going, yeah, force your way out, get a move to
Yeah.
Newcastle. There is hypocrisy in football fans, and there is hypocrisy in football in general. But 55 million looks like a bargain if you forget the fact that he can't shoot, he's offside all the time, and he's 29 years old.
Well, I was going to ask you about the eventual fee. I mean, 55 million for, as you say, a player who is, heading towards I'm not going to say the latter years of his career, but he's certainly in the autumn of his career, if you want to call it that. Was a surprise at Brentford at that?
I think that everybody, as soon as Brian Mbeumo was leaving, it was almost expected that Yoane Wissa was going to leave, because the two of them had like an unbreakable bond at the football club, and you could see it off the pitch and on the pitch. They were brilliant together, and it goes to show that they scored 39 goals between them last season, with Brian Mbeumo getting 20 and Wissa getting 19. So when Brian did ultimately leave and he went off to Manchester United, there was a feeling that Wissa would be next out of the door.
Yeah.
I did think for a little while that if one goes, the other would stay. But with Thiago coming back in, we had the players to be able to let them go. And when you've got a player who's 29 years old, he's been at the club for 4 years, and a team like Newcastle or Manchester United with Brian Mbeumo come in and say, oh, here's 75 million or here's 55 million. It's hard for a club like us to turn that down. I think that many Brentford fans were surprised at the figure that he ended up going for. I, for one, didn't think that he would go for such an amount. I expected closer to 30, to be totally honest. But hey, you've already mentioned the philosophy of the football club about how we bring players in and we sell them on. We did it with, we can go back to Ollie Watkins and Neil Maupay and Scott Hogan. You can go back some way, Andre Gray as well. And it's what we do as a club. We buy in cheap, we sell high. But I was surprised that he went for the figure that he did.
And that is looking a better deal as the months go by for Brentford by quite some distance, you would say.
I do like, as I say, the fickleness of football fans is brilliant. That when Wissa was sold, all over the socials would be Brentford fans saying the step between Brentford and Newcastle is huge. Let's not ignore the fact that Newcastle are a massive club, and you have higher expectations than what we at Brentford will have for us for our season. So if he performs well, you'll think he's a great player. If he plays exactly the way he played at Brentford, 75% of the time you may find it very frustrating, and that's definitely what it's looking like.
I mean, we look at the Isak situation at Liverpool. Look, it is unfortunate the injury he's got. It's an awful injury. But the fact he was struggling before that, and I think he'd only scored, what was it, 1-2 Premier League goals max? There was a little bit of, is karma at play here. The fact that Wissa obviously got the injury, hasn't really hit form yet at all. Yes, he scored, a few goals, but he hasn't really hit the form maybe that was expected of him. Is there kind of a little bit of pleasure being taken in that pain for Brentford fans?
Yeah, I'm sure that Newcastle and Brentford fans alike are reeling in the, I want to say that the failures of what these have been. Obviously, we could get past this weekend and Wissa scores 10 goals between now and the end of the season. Same for Alexander Isak, and it looks like they've been really good signings for the season. But for now, I think that Newcastle and Brentford fans alike, for similar reasons, are enjoying the lack of success that those players are having, shall we say.
So when we look at Saturday's game, who do you think Newcastle should be wary of? Who do you think that the main threat? I know it's an easy one to say, Thiago, but if we look beyond him, where would you look for that threat that maybe Newcastle weren't expecting?
I think that what we've been lucky with is that threat could come from anywhere on the pitch. With the way that we've played recently as well, we like to sort of suck teams in to be able to play that ball over the top. And that's how we got our goal at Villa at the weekend. I was down to 10 men, get the goal, see out the 3 points, which is massive for us, especially considering where they are. But to go to a place like St James's Park, we need to be able to absorb the pressure to be able to catch teams on the counter. So you have to think about players like Jordan Henderson, who will sit deep and play that ball long, which is what he does. We've got players like Dango Watara, who obviously there was the incident at the G-Tech where Dan Burn got sent off for a foul on Wissa, on Dango Watara.
On your mind.
Yeah, now you've mentioned him, eh? So Dango Watara will always cause team problems because of the way that he runs at them. Thiago, he's got 16 goals this season. It's hard to not think of him. But when you've got players in midfield like Matthias Jensen, who's had a brilliant season so far, Mikael Damsgaard, we know what he is capable of doing, especially what he did last year. Christopher Ayer, our centre-back, he's been at the club for probably 4 or 5 years. I can't remember exactly when he joined, but he's just signed another long-term deal. He picked up a knock against Forest, went off at about 35 minutes thinking, oh no, this is going to be one of those long-term ones. And then he started at Villa and we dropped our captain. Nathan Collins got dropped. And I think it goes to show that the impact that Christopher Ayer has had on that defence. And he is one that, I'm going to jinx it, you don't see a mistake out of him very often. But with Nathan Collins, with Sepp Vandenberg, they've got a mistake in them. But he raises the levels of those. And he has been pivotal to the success that we've had defensively, especially last weekend, which is funny because prior to that, we lost 2 on the bounce, 2-0 at home to Forest, 2-0 away to Chelsea, conceding 4 shots on target in total in those 2 games. So Christopher Ayer is a big threat defensively and offensively. Igor Thiago, as we say, have scored 16 goals, but we're quite fortunate that the threat can come from anywhere.
I had a good chat with one of our veteran reporters covering Newcastle, John Gibson, yesterday. He's been covering Newcastle since the 60s. We reflected on the week Newcastle have had, obviously going out the Carabao Cup in the semi-final, losing heavily at Liverpool. And he said, I think his words were something along the lines of that Brentford will absolutely sense blood here coming to St. James's Park. Do you get that impression from maybe what's been said from Keith Andrews ahead of the game?
I think that Keith Andrews has changed his sort of approach to games at the moment, where he's just going for it. And he's not seeing defeat. He's not seeing draws. He's only seeing wins, which is what you want from your manager. Kevin Schade got sent off at the weekend away at Aston Villa, which means he's not eligible to play for the next 3 games. So we will be missing him. We will miss his pace and what that he can bring. But like you said, Newcastle haven't had a fantastic week. You know, you've lost 2 out of the last 3 in the Premier League, which is obviously the same for us. But prior to that, we went on a 6-game unbeaten run. I believe that if Keith Andrews approaches the game correctly and attacks the game right, it doesn't matter where we go, we could get something out of the game, whether it's a point, whether it's 3. But Brentford have never won at St. James's Park. So,
yeah, I think that the last time Brentford won at Newcastle was 1935, I think it was. So it's going back a long time, but records there to be broken. Newcastle having a difficult season, but they are still in the Champions League. You know, they've got that playoff round game coming up against Karabakh, still in the FA Cup. Yes, they've got a tough game at Villa. So there is still a lot to play for this season. But I think it isn't the season Newcastle fans maybe thought they would have, building on the success of the Carabao Cup win and getting the Champions League. I do kind of get the feeling Newcastle can still be a threat. So who do you think Brentford will be wary of?
I just want to say, you say about records being broken. Last weekend was the first time we've won at Aston Villa. So you never know. There could be 2 in a row. You never know. Newcastle, like Brentford, or Brentford, like Newcastle, we have chances and danger coming from everywhere on the pitch. Players like Bruno, players like Sandro Tonali, Harvey Barnes loves a goal against Brentford. Anthony Gordon, thankfully, he's not available this weekend. But the dangers of the set pieces from Kieran Trippier and even your centre-backs, I don't know if it's going to be Botman and Thiaw this weekend. I hope I'm saying that right as well for Thiaw.
Yeah,
that they can bring that threat forward defensively from set pieces. So could come from anywhere. But I think if we are able to nullify and just stop that ball getting into our box, which we did so well recently, that provided we take our chances, we could nick something from this game.
We'll ask you before we go just for a prediction. We always ask for a view from the opposition prediction. What are you going with?
Or can I give you a head and heart prediction here?
Of course. That's what football is, isn't it? Sometimes the heart rules the head.
Right. Well, I'll go with my head first. I have seen some dreadful games up at St James's Park. I've seen us lose 4-1, 5-1, and that's a long way to go to lose in the manner in which we have done. But we haven't been bad recently. Although we lost at Forest and although we lost at Chelsea, we created chances, and it was our own mistakes that defeated ourselves. We was fantastic at Villa. Again, like I say, winning for the first time ever there. My head is saying we're going to go there and it's going to be 1-0 Newcastle. And it's going to pain me because it's a long trip for that. But my heart's telling me that we can go there and we can get something out of this game. And if we can nullify you successfully, I'll go for 2-1 Bs.
Be a big win, a historic win as well, of course.
Historic,
but
yeah.
Craig, many thanks for your time. Check out the Ealing Road podcast for everything from Brentford fans ahead of the game and after the game. I'll be back on Monday with the Monday show with Lee Ryder, looking back at what Newcastle fans will hope will be a successful Saturday evening. Have a great weekend. Have a safe journey up, Craig, and we will see you next time.